The Akamarians' feeble alien bodies snapped like twigs as humanity's fists of fury rained down upon them, avenging years of death, pain, and suffering the alien scum had inflicted. It was payback time. 5 years ago, Thomas Sullivan fought on the front lines during the first horrific Akamarian invasion of Earth. Cities burned. Millions died. Humanity was brought to the brink of annihilation, only spared by the enemy's sudden, inexplicable retreat. The government claimed victory, but Thomas knew the grim truth: they let us live. The nightmarish memories still jolted him awake in cold sweats. An emergency alert blared. Thomas read the message, blood running cold. Akamarian ships detected entering Earth orbit. All military personnel report for duty immediately. A second message from his former squadmate Mike Yeager confirmed the worst. It's happening again. They're back. Thomas rushed to base, finding soldiers scrambling to defensive positions, faces grim and weapons loaded. Mike pointed to a massive Akamarian mothership descending through the clouds, energy weapons glowing ominously. Thomas swallowed hard, a chill running down his spine as realization set in. This time the Akamarians were playing for keeps. They wouldn't retreat again until humanity was utterly crushed beneath their heel. But Thomas and humanity's brave defenders would be damned if they let these alien bastards take their home without one hell of a fight. It was time to show these ET assholes what humans were made of: grit, courage, tenacity, an indomitable spirit that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees. The Akamarians were about to learn a painful lesson. Don't mess with humans. A city-shaking boom rattled the sky, the air itself shuddering from the impact of alien dropships detaching from the menacing Akamarian mothership. The ship streaked groundward, packed with death. Thomas and Mike locked eyes, a flash of knowing dread passing between them. It was all happening again. The alien bastards were gunning for strategic targets, just like last time. Panicked citizens fled through the streets, cars abandoned mid-intersection. Discarding belongings in their haste to escape, the dropships opened fire, alien energy blasts reducing vehicles to molten wrecks and buildings to piles of rubble. Smoke and dust choked the air. Suddenly, a searing blue beam of pure annihilation lanced from the mothership, spearing a fleeing passenger plane. The aircraft detonated in a plume of flame, wreckage and bodies plummeting to the ground in grisly rainfall. Thomas's heart seized in his chest. This was new. That beam packed way more punch than anything the Akamarians brought to bear in the first invasion. They'd upgraded. Another beam sizzled from the sky, vaporizing an office tower in an eye blink. The skyscraper vanished, replaced by a smoking crater. Mike staggered back, steadying himself against a parked Humvee, face white with shock. Before they could even begin to process the fresh hell raining from above, Thomas's radio crackled with a frantic transmission from the dockyards. The signal was staticky, panicked voice, nearly drowned by screams and shrieking. "Command, you're not going to believe this. They're coming out of the water. There are things in the water. Some kind of new Akamarian soldier. They're swarming onto land from submersible dropships. And, oh God, they're fast. They're fast." The transmission cut to the sound of human screams and alien screeches, wet ripping sounds, crunching, then dead air. Thomas's mind spun, his imagination conjuring nightmares of how many of these aquatic invasion forces were clawing their way onto shores worldwide. He didn't get the chance to ponder it long. An armored personnel carrier came roaring up in a plume of dust, tires screeching as it skidded to a stop alongside him and Mike. The hatch slammed open, revealing the ashen, sweat-streaked face of Colonel Graves. "Sullivan, Yeager, get in," Graves barked, voice tight with urgency. "New orders from the top. A high-priority Akamarian prisoner from the First War has agreed to cooperate, but will only speak to the Marines who captured him. They need you for the interrogation. Time to go." Thomas and Mike piled into the vehicle, slamming the hatch behind them. The APC lurched into motion, engine roaring. Buildings blurred past the narrow, mud-spattered viewports as they sped towards the classified black site where the prisoner was held. Thomas's pulse hammered in his ears. If this Akamarian could give them an edge, some scrap of intel to help turn the tide. But a cold sliver of dread wormed into his gut. This felt wrong. Why would the alien help them now with his species on the brink of conquering Earth? Unless it was a trap. Thomas and Mike could be speeding headlong into an ambush that would seal humanity's fate. The APC's tires squealed as Graves punched the accelerator. Thomas and Mike grabbed the overhead handholds, bracing themselves against the vehicle's wild gyrations. Rubble pinged off the armored hull, adding to the symphony of destruction raging outside. The acrid stench of burning seeped into the cabin. Stinging their nostrils, Graves had to shout to make himself heard over the DN. "Listen, I know this interrogation won't be easy, but we need any intel Karos can give us. I don't know what kind of game that alien bastard is playing, but if his information can help us beat back these Akamarian fuckers, then we have to play ball for now. The President himself authorized this operation. Report your findings directly to him." Thomas's thoughts drifted as the APC raced out of the besieged city, bouncing over war-torn roads towards the hidden black site. Memories of the op 5 years prior, when he and Mike captured Karos, flashed through his mind in disjointed bursts. The desperate raid on that Akamarian outpost. Karos' unsettling calm when they found him alone, surrounded by banks of alien computers. The lightning speed with which he killed Thomas's squad mates before he and Mike could bring him down. The sudden, inexplicable Akamarian retreat right after Karos was in chains. It never sat right. Why would Karos wait for them? Allow himself to be captured? What was his angle? The APC's brakes shrieked, slamming Thomas back into the moment. They'd arrived. Graves led them into the bunker complex, a rat's warren of reinforced concrete and blast doors. Guards peeled off as they descended, until it was just Thomas and Mike following Graves into the bowels of the black site. The interrogation room was Spartan. A single steel chair bolted to the floor. Karos sat shackled to it, his alien features betraying nothing as they entered. The guards retreated, sealing the Marines in with the prisoner. Thomas took a steadying breath, the air heavy with anticipation. Karos raised his head, eyes boring into Thomas. A slow smile spread across his inhuman face. "Thomas Sullivan, I told them you would come," Karos intoned. His English was flawless, the words precise and clipped. "You have many questions. I have waited a long time for this conversation." A glance passed between Thomas and Mike, a silent, "What the hell?" as unease twisted their guts. Karos's demeanor unsettled them even more than it had 5 years ago. The Akamarian leaned forward against his restraints, face suddenly grave. "I will tell you how to save your species, but the price will be high. You must be willing to sacrifice everything." Thomas stared at the alien device in his palm, a chill seeping into his bones despite the sweat beading his brow. Karos's words echoed in his mind, each revelation a hammer blow to his psyche. Sleeper agents, living among them, indistinguishable from human. Their leaders compromised. Trust no one. Mike pushed off the wall, rubbing his neck where Karos had pinned him. He glared at the alien, rage and confusion warring on his face. "How do we know this isn't another trick? That you're not leading us into a trap?" Karos's lips curled in a cold approximation of a smile. "You don't. But what choice do you have? Even now your cities burn, your people die. The infiltrators plot your downfall from within. This is your only chance." Thomas closed his fist around the device, its edges biting into his palm. He met Mike's eyes, saw the same grim determination reflected back. No words were needed. They'd walk through hell together, if that's what it took to save humanity. Thomas turned back to Karos, jaw clenched. "Tell us how it works. How do we root out these imposters?" Karos tapped the device in Thomas's hand. "Activate it in the presence of a suspected hybrid. It will reveal their true nature. But be warned, they will know they've been discovered, and they will stop at nothing to maintain their cover." Mike snatched the device from Thomas's hand, examining it with a scowl. "So we're supposed to, go around pointing this thing at everyone until we find an alien? That's insane." Karos shook his head. "Not everyone. The hybrids gravitate towards positions of power and influence. Start there. Your leaders, your commanders, anyone with the authority to sabotage your defenses from within. Thomas's mind raced, the faces of their superiors flashing through his thoughts. Who among them could be an imposter? Colonel Graves. Who brought them here? The President himself. Karos stood, towering over the Marines. I have given you the tools, the rest is up to you. Trust no one. Question everything. The price of failure is extinction. With that, Karos strode to the door, the metal parting before him like water. Thomas and Mike watched him go, the weight of their new mission settling heavy on their shoulders. Mike turned to Thomas, the device gripped tight in his fist. His voice was barely a whisper. We're on our own now, aren't we? Can't trust command, can't trust our own government, just us against the world. Thomas nodded grimly, the impossible task ahead etching itself into the lines of his face. Then we'd better get started. If the Akamarians have infiltrated half as deep as Karos says, this is going to get bloody. Mike huffed a mirthless laugh. When has it ever been anything else? We're Marines. Bloody is what we do. He tossed the device to Thomas, squaring his shoulders. Lead the way, brother. Let's go save the world. Thomas caught the device, the smooth metal already warming to his touch. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling the weight of it like an anchor against the churning sea of doubt and fear in his gut. Together they stepped out of the interrogation room, into a world where the enemy could be anyone, and trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. The halls of the bunker seemed to close in around them, each passing soldier a potential threat, each shadowed corner hiding betrayal. As they emerged into the chaos of the invasion outside, the smoke-choked sky mirroring the uncertainty that clouded their hearts, one thought crystallized in Thomas's mind. One unassailable truth that would guide them through the trials to come. Humanity would survive this. They would endure. And he and Mike would carve that future out of the flesh of any alien or traitor who stood in their way, even if it cost them everything. The device felt like a lead weight in Thomas's pocket, as he and Mike set out on their grim mission. They started with low-level bureaucrats, pulling them into quiet corners and empty rooms. Thomas would extract the scanner, Mike would restrain the target, and together they'd watch the color drain from the official's face as the device confirmed their worst fears. Green light human, red light not human, not anymore. They'd share a nod, a wordless agreement, before Mike dragged the hybrid away. Thomas tried not to dwell on the muffled gunshots that always followed, tried to ignore the way crimson blood mingled with silvery ichor. The higher they climbed in the power structure, the more hybrids they uncovered. Grim reality eroded their hope. If the rot extended this deep, could they even trust their own unit? Each other. Paranoia became their constant companion. Every interaction was a minefield, every shared glance a silent accusation. They took to meeting in secret, constantly changing locations, watching their words even when alone. The exhaustion of perpetual vigilance etched itself into the lines of their faces. Then came the message, an encrypted communique from a top military advisor, promising information that could turn the tide. Thomas and Mike were wary, but desperation outweighed caution. They had to take the chance. They arrived at the rendezvous, an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. Shadows clung to every corner, the air thick with the stench of neglect. No advisor waited to greet them. Instead, a dozen figures emerged from the darkness, weapons glinting in the faint light. At their head, a familiar face, now twisted by alien malice. Colonel Graves, his eyes reflecting an inhuman red. "Did you really think you could root us out so easily?" Graves sneered, his voice layered with a metallic echo. "We are Legion, we are everywhere, and now you are ours." Gunfire erupted, strobing the room in muzzle flashes. Thomas and Mike dove for cover, returning fire from behind rusted machinery. They were hopelessly outnumbered, outflanked. It was only a matter of time. A cry of pain, and Mike fell, clutching his side. Blood pulsed between his fingers, his face a mask of agony. Thomas rushed to him, mind whirling. He couldn't take on Graves and his forces alone, but he couldn't leave Mike, his brother in arms, to these monsters. Mike grabbed Thomas's collar, pulling him close. Blood flecked his lips as he spoke, each word an effort. "Go. Finish the mission. Don't let my death be for nothing." With a sob tearing at his throat, Thomas wrenched himself away. He ran, Mike's screams chasing him, the sound of gunfire and cruel laughter snapping at his heels. Tears blurred his vision as he fled into the night, alone. The weight of the world had never felt so heavy, but he had to keep going, for Mike, for humanity, even if it killed him. Thomas's path was clear. Cut off the serpent's head and the body would die. The Akamarian mothership loomed in his mind, a behemoth of alien might. He had to find a way inside, to strike at the heart of the invasion. It was a suicide mission. He knew that. But what choice did he have? He was humanity's last hope, a flickering candle against the crushing dark. He'd make it count, even if it was the last thing he ever did. Thomas began to plan, each step a nail in his coffin. He'd die on that ship, he was certain, a small price to pay for the survival of his species. The mothership's defenses were formidable, but Thomas had a few tricks up his sleeve. Stolen access codes gleaned from the minds of the hybrids he'd put down, a cloaking device, reverse-engineered from Akamarian tech, his own burning determination, a fire that would consume him and the enemy alike. He slipped aboard like a wraith clad in the skin of his foes. Mimetic armor shimmered around him, a chameleon's camouflage. He moved through the halls of the great ship, hugging the shadows, death on silent feet. The command center was a hive of activity, Akamarians and their thralls working in eerie unison. Thomas crept closer, unseen, his finger hovering over the trigger of the pulse bomb strapped to his chest. One push, and it would all be over. But a voice gave him pause, a human voice, achingly familiar. Thomas edged forward, disbelief warring with dawning horror as he took in the scene before him. There, standing before the Akamarian commander, was a group of humans, men and women Thomas recognized, high-ranking officials and military leaders. They were deep in discussion, their tones avid, conspiratorial. As Thomas listened, the terrible truth unfolded. These were no prisoners, no puppets dancing on alien strings. They were collaborators, traitors to their own kind. The Akamarians hadn't infiltrated the highest levels of power. They'd been invited in, with open arms and hungry eyes. It was a devil's bargain, etched in human greed and alien ambition. The Akamarians would provide the tech, the means to dominate, and in return, these turncoats would rule over the ashes, the kings and queens of a broken earth. Bile rose in Thomas's throat, revulsion twisting his gut. He'd thought the hybrids were monsters, but this was a betrayal beyond imagining. How could they sell out their own species, condemn billions to death or servitude? The bitter truth settled over Thomas like a shroud. The enemy was within. It always had been. Humanity's greatest threat came not from the stars, but from the darkness in its own soul. And in that moment, Thomas understood what he had to do. The collaborators, the Akamarian leadership, but they were too entrenched, too powerful. They'd slither away like always to poison and plot anew, unless he cut them out at the root. His hand was steady as he armed the bomb, his breathing slow and even. He stepped out from the shadows, letting the mimetic camouflage fall away. He wanted them to see him, to look into the eyes of the man who would be their end. The collaborators scrambled back, shouting for their Akamarian masters. The commander reared up, eyes flashing with rage and something like fear. Thomas smiled. It was the smile of the damned, of a man who'd seen the abyss and chosen to fall. "For Earth!" he whispered and released the trigger. The world went white. The bomb detonated with the force of a collapsing star, fire and shrapnel and searing light consuming the command deck. Thomas felt the heat, felt his skin blister and blacken, felt his bones shatter like glass. But there was no pain, only a grim satisfaction as he watched the collaborators and the Akamarian elite disappear in the maelstrom, their screams swallowed by the roar of the blast. The explosion ripped through the mothership, setting off a chain reaction of detonations. The great vessel shuddered, lurching drunkenly in the sky, Explosions bloomed along its hull, fireballs blossoming and fading like obscene flowers. Then, with a groan of rending metal, the ship broke apart. It fell from the heavens in a rain of fire and debris, a falling star to mark the passing of an era. The war was over. The Akamarians, robbed of their leadership, fell into disarray. The human resistance surged forth, hope rekindled by the destruction of the mothership. The invaders were driven back, their holdouts ferreted out and destroyed without mercy. In the end, humanity prevailed, bloodied and battered, a civilization in ruins but alive, free. And as the people looked to the stars, watching the last of the Akamarian ships fleeing for the void, they whispered a name. The name of the man who'd given everything to save them. The man who'd lit the spark that burned the invaders out. Thomas Sullivan, hero, martyr, savior of the human race. But Mike knew the truth. Lying in a hospital bed, his body a ruin of scars and grafted flesh, he remembered the man behind the legend, the friend, the brother, who'd made the hard choices, who'd sacrificed his very soul so that others could live free. And as Mike wept, his tears mingling with the bitter ashes of victory, he swore that Thomas's sacrifice would not be forgotten, that the price paid in blood and betrayal would be remembered, a cautionary tale for the ages. For the war was over, but the scars remained. The knowledge that the greatest evil lived not in the cold void of space, but in the human heart. And as Mike looked out over the shattered landscape of a wounded Earth, he couldn't help but wonder. Had they truly won, or just survived to face the next betrayal, the next enemy from within? Only time would tell. And time, like the future, was a fickle beast. Humanity had earned a reprieve, but not a guarantee. They'd have to earn that, day by day, choice by choice. Mike closed his eyes, the weight of the world settling on his shoulders like a shroud. The road ahead would be long and hard, paved with sacrifice and sorrow. But he'd walk it, for Thomas, for the future, for the hope that someday the human race would be worthy of the second chance it had been given. The chance that Thomas Sullivan had died to provide. If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.